Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking out your time. Hi, during this very important time between Martin Luther King Day and inaugurating our first women vice president. Um, this is a very, very important project to me. And my name is Beverly Kim. I'm the founder of The Abundance Setting. And I wanted to also thank Randy from FAB for using your platform to help us have this national conversation. And thank you, American Express, for sponsoring it. Um, the reason why we're here is because I'm very passionate about this career. I mean, I have two restaurants in Chicago, Parachute and Wherewithal, but I can tell you how many times I wanted to give up becoming a chef because it was very difficult without the systems and supports and resources and all the things that I need to thrive. And luckily, I have a mentor here, Chef Sarah, who's here today to encourage me. But really, this is a unique industry where only, if you look at the statistics, only 6% head chefs are women in independent restaurants. Head chefs slash owners, according to the National Restaurant Association, is 22%. But that includes QSR, such as fast food corporate chains, but very difficult to make it as an independent business, as a woman, as a leader. And the reason why is the culinary and hospitality industry has very, very unique challenges that most people don't think about or are aware of, but we work nights, we work holidays, we work weekends. We don't have systemic support to, be there for us. And a lot of us women self-select ourselves out. We also have sometimes hostile kitchen environments that we work in, and it's all kind of interrelated. And there's not a better time to really talk about this in the middle of the pandemic. The pandemic has broken this industry. We're completely down to like nothing. And what we're realizing in rebuilding our house of the industry is there are a lot of major leaks and a lot of major work that we have to do to rebuild it in a better way. And it starts with having a conversation. And I wanted to bring these women that I really respect, who've had the grit and figured out how to do it, but also want to share and make it better, make this a better industry for all. And so I just wanted to kick that off. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation, what everyone has to say. And thank you for all your time today.
Beverly, that's such a great intro. It gives us the scope of the challenge and the issues, and the incredible panelists here today have a lot to say and a lot of wisdom. So I'm Dana Count, I'm the moderator for today. And we're gonna kick it off by having each of the panelists tell you who they are, their business, their relationship to kids in the industry. They might have them, their ages, and what is the one thing about motherhood in culinary that is so important that no one ever told you? That's sort of like the key to life. So I think to make it easy, I'm actually gonna call on you in the order that you are on my screen, which might not be the order on your screen, but then we're not worried about who's gonna answer first. So I'm gonna start with Sarah Stegner.
Thank you. And I wanted to say I'm so grateful for everybody who's come on and listened to this. It's such an important conversation. So the gratitude is there, and I appreciate all the women that are speaking up and are leaders in the industry that have helped make change. My name is Sarah Stegner. I co-own Prairie Grass Cafe in Northbrook, Illinois, with my partner, George Bombaris. I used to work at the Ritz-Carlton, Chicago. I'm one of the founding members of Green City Market. We started the market 20 years ago, and it has over 50 sustainable third-party certified farms that participate in it and look to it for their livelihoods. I am a founding member of Abundance Setting, and so thrilled to be doing this with Beverly. We've known each other for years, and she did work at the Ritz-Carlton with me many years ago, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. I would say that for me, one of the key factors in all of this is that women don't always have conversations about the struggles in their lives in their workplace. You need to present an image of being strong and capable, and any kind of vulnerability isn't always thought of as the right thing to do in a kitchen. And I want to say that having these conversations publicly and talking about it is the way we'll find solutions as an industry. And this panel and many people in the industry are looking for a better way of life, how to enhance the quality of our lives as restaurateurs and chefs. And that is the fundamentals of what we need to address. And a big component of that is women in the kitchen and how they're going to succeed. Abundant Setting has been able to mentor and identify 3 women that have children that are coming up within the industry. And that component of mentoring and meal relief that we're offering them has been very powerful way to connect to these women and to actually, I mean, for years, people, I did interviews and I had people ask me, you know, why aren't there women? And the same issues that I talked about 20 years ago are still what we're dealing with now. The progress has been very minimal. For me, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and she was raised by another woman and myself. But to do it on my own, I just don't know. So having those supports in place are key, and addressing the issues that we stumble over are what we need to do today.
Thank you, Sarah. So the 2 takeaways there: conversations and support, and we'll get back to that. Katina?
Thank you. Hi, thank you for that. This is Katina Ruhumbika. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources for a major food group based in New York City. And, you know, I thank Randy as well as everyone else, you know, here on the panel for allowing me to be part of this, you know, really important conversation. And, you know, and for me, not being a mother, but also, you know, being in a position that creates culture, right? Culture that is inclusive. And we think of inclusivity sometimes, you know, we sometimes forget, you know, the things that we don't see, right? So we take mothers, for example, what we're discussing today, and making sure that, you know, I always think about, are we creating, and this is more, I would say, if you're a leader, if you're in a position of influence, when you're thinking about the working mothers in your company, in your restaurant, you know, are you creating an environment that's welcoming? And, you know, because, you know, one thing I always advise working mothers is look for a company that's right for you, right? And I know that can come from a place of privilege sometimes, because sometimes we don't have that option. But when you can, you know, look at that company culture. Are they flexible? Are they understanding? Do they embrace, you know, your schedule? Do they embrace the idea of, you know, not having traditional work hours? I think that's incredibly important, and even more important for leaders to create that environment. Something Sarah said that struck with me is lean on your community. I think it's incredibly important to make sure that you understand your support system. Sometimes it's outside of just your family and your friends. I love this industry. And why? Because, you know, it's so, you know, familial. It is, you know, an industry that believes in taking care of each other, taking care of its people. So leaning on that community, I think, will, you know, will always go a long way. And the last thing is, you know, don't hesitate to be vocal about your needs in order to be successful in your role. Oftentimes when we think about being successful and the resources that we need, we think of tangibles, right? I need this tool, I need that tool, I need this. However, think about, hey, you know what, this is also something else, you know, that I'm going to need. I'm going to need for you to be a bit more understanding. You know, I need to work, you know, different hours. I need to work part-time too as well. Doesn't make me any less of an asset, but sometimes working part-time is what that individual needs, right, to be successful in that role. So I would say, you know, that's the advice I would give. And that's the advice that I do give, you know, to working mothers.
That's great, Katina. Thank you so much for that. I think one of the things that has come up in the information that we got from all of you in the audience is finding that place where people are flexible is so important to you, and figuring out a way to advocate for yourself is also really important to you. Two things that Katina mentioned and that we will discuss later, because I think it's at the core of the challenges people face in trying to get that right job and being comfortable at work. Gail?
Hi,
Yeah.
thank you, Dana, and thank you, Abundant Setting and Refab and everyone here for having me today. I'm Gail Simmons, and I was a cook a long time ago, and then switched to working in the media side of the food industry. I worked sort of indirectly under Dana for 15 years. And I now, most of my time is spent in television, development, production, both on and off camera. I have, but still very much in the recipe and food industry, and really hoping to be a champion and a cheerleader for not just the food industry in general, but specifically for women and women's voices in the industry. I have two small children, a daughter who's 7 and a son who's almost 3. I did not have them early in my life. And so partially, with full disclosure, because when I was a cook, I very clearly saw that for me, I could not figure out how to do both. And I knew that both were what I loved, but I felt at the time that I was starting my career, felt really hindered by having to choose and not knowing how to do either well together. So I obviously this is a space where there aren't clear answers. And as a mother, the two things, Dana, to your question that I wish I had understood more and that I think are so important to know about are, one, the mental load, which is, just like Tina said, not seen in the industry. The mental load that I think women and mothers carry into the workplace when it is not just ever going to be about focusing solely on what's right in front of you. Because the mental load that we all carry is so great in managing the many constantly moving parts, especially right now, that sometimes make it almost debilitating to feel like you can do your job well and also parent in the way that you need to. And we're all still working at that. And along with that, I think especially for people with small children and in the early stages of parenthood, the loneliness that comes with that, while we are all reinventing the wheel sort of together, apart, for lack of a better word, although it is particularly significant right now, even more so, the loneliness that motherhood can create, I think, is often not talked about, while we are all trying to do exactly the same thing. So I hope that these conversations really open up that network, that support, and that community for women to be able to lean on each other and make sure they know they're not alone.
I think that's beautiful. I think just like listening to each person's story, that notion that you're not alone, each one of you reflects so many of the comments, and the experience is very common if we can connect and not just do it in our own little bubble. And I think that first thing that kept you from early motherhood, which is figuring out how to do both, I think that we're going to talk about that, because it would be great to be able to feel you can, and many people who are listening, they actually are trying to do both. So we want to talk about answers for that, or suggestions. There's no answers. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Kindred. I am an owner of 2 restaurants in North Carolina, Kindred, our namesake, in Davidson, North Carolina, and Hello Sailor, where I'm at right now. I have 3 children, 9, 7, and 4, 1 girl and 2 boys. So we're kind of in that middle, in between young childhood and school age, navigating all that right now. And I would say to your question, Dana, about what was one thing I wish I had been told, I think that for me, we work in a countercultural sort of industry. So the restaurant business, we operate on different hours. Like you guys said, you know, we're going to be the ones that are working the weekends. We're the ones that are your servers during the holiday season. You know, Mondays are our days off. That's your first day back, you know, like, so everything about it is countercultural. And I think, you know, and to your point, Beverly, that there is a very small minority of us that are owners, operators, chefs in this business. So you take that, you know, you expand upon that of how few of us of us are mothers trying to operate in this countercultural sort of industry. It's just a small amount of us. So I think what I wish I had been told early on with my first, and this was before I owned restaurants, I was working for somebody else, is that you know, I think that as mothers, we fall into the comparison trap a lot, and we sort of feel the need to sort of like figure out, are we doing this right, by looking at our peers. But oftentimes our peers are in a completely different boat than we are. And it took me a while to figure out and get comfortable with the idea that, you know, I'm going to have to raise my kids in a countercultural way in response to what I do. And that's okay. You know what I mean? And finding that voice, and then also finding peers that are kind of in that same boat like we all are, where you're like, okay, you know what, maybe I'm going to have to look at this completely different, and maybe that's all right. And you know, and just sort of looking at the long line of women before us that have had to do that and have had to pivot and do things different for whatever their personal circumstances might have been. But there's kind of some pride in that, but I think it takes a while to sort of escape from that comparison trap, that guilt trap, to sort of realize, listen, this is just going to be, you know, like, I'm going to raise my kids under the table. That's just the way it's going to be. You know, I mean, they're just going to have to be counting with cocktail olives to learn their, you know what I mean? It's just going to be different. So, but I think it just took a while. I wish I had known that a little bit earlier.
This notion of guilt comes up over and over, and, you know, how to address guilt, how to assuage guilt, and how to avoid guilt. So I think that'll be a rich topic for later. Farah?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be here and share and learn and talk about this. I'm Farah Masani, and I am a woman. I'm a farmer, and I overnight became a mother of 2 boys. My partner, Sean, came into our relationship with 2 children that we have full-time custody of. And they were 4 and 9, 7, 9 when they came into my life, and I magically became a mom. And it was hard, it was scary, it was new. But when you're faced with this, you just have to make it happen. And so, like everything else that we're faced with, I just picked up and made it happen. I drew my knowledge from my work as a farmer, where I've spent a lot of time in the fields, also working with indigenous populations in different parts of the world, where I learned that there is no work and then family. It's all integrated. Any part of the world you go to, you will see a woman in a field with a child on their back doing the work. And so, drawing upon that, I figured, I'm like, I'm going to have to integrate these children that are now mine into my work life, my farm life, my personal life, my home, my everything. And I'm not going to try to fit them into these structures that are created for us. And if I have to pull them out of school because they have to be, like you said, under the table, counting olives, learning their math, or on the fields with me, doing whatever it is I need to do, or running a delivery, or doing whatever my life has to do at that moment, I'm going to do it. I also work with Barcelona Wine Bar, a restaurant group that has 18 restaurants across the country, and I purchase and source for them food from across the world. Part of my job is working with farmers and getting food to the restaurants, amongst other things. And so life is busy, life is hectic, and incorporating my children into my life the way I see fit is super important for me to be successful in what I do. One of the things that is something that I take with me all the time is that it is okay to ask for help, and it is okay to be vulnerable around the people that are with you. And so my problem becomes my community's problem. There was a time in my life where I could not figure out what to do with my kids in the evening hours because my partner worked the evening shift and I was traveling. And so what did I do? I reached out to the restaurants in my community and I'm like, you know what? My kids are going to come to you between 6 and 8 and they're going to eat their meals here and you're going to take care of them and feed them. And here's my credit card. Because I know in the restaurant world, people are kind, they're loving, they remember your allergies, they remember what you like to eat, they're nurturing. And why wouldn't I go to the restaurants in my community and say, you know what, my kids are going to hang out at your place for these 2 hours? My problem got solved by my community. And so I'm going to leave you with those thoughts.
And this community that is partly abundant setting, partly fab, is really a wonderful community to be a part of and reach out to each other for solutions. Chantrice?
Hey everyone, please excuse my background. As I was telling a lot going on, this came from a farm and started the Feed the West program last year in response to police brutality and the food apartheid here in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the mom of one 7-year-old, and I'm the caregiver for about a dozen children. And so their parents, most of them are in the food industry. So, you know, they struggle a lot with things like transportation, childcare, safe childcare, especially in COVID. And so one thing I kind of wish I knew before I started all this work was that there were so many other women, especially women of color and Black women, who have done this before. I have the only Black-run grocery store in Louisville, Kentucky, and other things. These grocery stores that existed when my grandparents were my age, they don't exist anymore. So I wish I had those stories. I wish I had that information with me. So that would be one big thing. And then being a single mom, I know many on this call are single parents or parents of, you know, children of special needs. And that is often seen as a liability. I mean, motherhood in general is often seen as a liability in our community, in our workforce. But for me, I've started to see it as an asset, because if you, as a single parent, or you have 2 parents in the household, can manage your child's education, you can manage the budget, you can pinch pennies, you can make sure that you're using leftovers. You know, if you can do all these sorts of things, you can run a business. You can do accounts receivable because you're used to making sure you can pay for the school lunch and making sure they get engineering camp, the application in on time for the scholarship, making sure that they don't just eat Cheetos all day, which my son is in the back eating now. So it's, you know, being able to talk to women from different generations, being in circles like this. When we did the refab conversation a couple months ago, just understanding that people have done this before, women have done this before and done an amazing job. It's been an inspiration, but also it has been the blueprint. So that would be my advice is, sometimes, yes, you need to invent something from scratch because you're solving a problem that no one has ever solved before. But for many of the problems that exist, especially when it comes to sexism, there have been amazing women who have done these things before, and we can use that as a template or a blueprint to move forward, and use everyone in our network as a resource. Issa Rae talks about networking horizontally. Instead of me being like, okay, I'm going to sit around and wait for Oprah and Beyonce to fund my project. Instead, I can work with other farmers. We just came from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where there are Black farmers, Paducah, Kentucky, all these places where there are a bunch of people at the same level I'm at, or even below, in terms of where they've gotten in their career. And we can network together to get to where we want to go. And that's been amazing to see. And that's what I love about this collective. And I'm really happy to partner with Abundant Setting to make sure we can proliferate that sort of healing and that sort of just networking and community building. So thank you.
I love what you said about the blueprint, because we'll hear from Camilla, and then I want to talk about what blueprints you have seen to address some of the specific issues, so that people who are listening, leave this conversation with things that they can do, things that exist rather than, or could exist in a community, rather than things that are sort of a pipe dream or 10 years away. Camilla? Hi.
Hi.
Camilla Marcus, chef and owner of Westbourne, as well as now newly formed advocate, I guess, in the wake of COVID, one of the founding members of both the IRC as well as Relief Opportunities for All Restaurants alongside Dana. I've sort of found myself straddling a lot of different worlds, and I guess I have been a multi-hyphenate, for lack of a better word, in the industry for over a decade. I've cooked, I've worked in business development, I've done construction, I've done real estate, I've actually everything except for really front of house, which is funny because most people think I am more a front of house person. I've really never held any of those positions. I'm too clumsy to. I'm a mom of one. My son is a little bit over 1. I'm expecting a second in about 2 months. So forgive if there's some hot flashes going on here. I'm like now at that phase. I think for me, I think there's a few things at play that I struggle with in the industry. First and foremost, and someone actually mentioned it briefly in the chat, I'm self-funded, I run my own business, I don't have partners. The number one question I get is, oh, your husband runs your business, right? And I, chuckle and sort of say no. When we were building the restaurant, everyone would talk to him when he would visit, and he's like, I'm just visiting, like she's in charge. And, you get a lot of that. And I think, in the beginning too, it was a lot of, oh, well, you're not on the line 24/7. It's like, well, how could I do that? Run accounting, file our taxes, build the business, grow the business, fix the business. You just can't be all things to all people. And I do think there's sort of this unfair, for lack of a better word, superhuman expectation put on women that only gets harder as a mom, right? So for me, I was fortunate to take proper maternity leave, but that's because I own my business and we have a very different philosophy at Westbourne about work-life balance. We've always been a place that cared a lot about, everyone's life and their families. And the biggest hurdle to that I see in our industry is childcare. I mean, maternity leave doesn't matter if you can't go back to work, when you don't work a 9-to-5 job Monday through Friday. I mean, in fact, in our business, the higher value positions are weekends and nights, right? If you're going to work an event, if you're going to be a manager, you're totally not in the 9-to-5. It's why a lot of women, as we know, have always leaned towards pastry, and it's why a lot of women drop off the management track. And I've seen in my own business. So we've been very involved in trying to crack the childcare code. And I wish it took more precedence at the government level, frankly, above parental leave, although I know that's an unpopular point of view. I believe it's more important. And then I think it also comes down really to a lot of, media and attention and how we perceive success in this industry, and I think especially in the wake of COVID happened, my son was 6 months. We didn't know how anything was spreading. I was still nursing him. He didn't have all his shots. And I had to say to my team, I can't go into the restaurant. Like if I kill my own child based on going into work, like I can't look myself in the mirror, but I don't know a single male friend who's a chef or who runs their own restaurant business that even thought about that. That didn't even occur to them, and I do think, especially as a mom and a primary caretaker, especially for young children, who aren't in school, those choices feel impossible. So I definitely, for the first time since having my son, definitely feel a lot more friction between what I would do otherwise and, decisions I have to make for his best interest. And that adds, a whole other layer of complexity to wanting to succeed in this business, wanting to run, whether you want to run your own business or be part of one. There's just a lot of different trade-offs, and it's much harder to make those decisions that I think certainly non-parents have a lot less of that complexity. So that's what I say.
Thanks, Camilla. So I'd love to, one of the things that Camilla brought up is childcare, which is essential to being a mom at work, right? What do you do about that? And as Katie said, we're like in an upside down, you didn't call it upside down, but we're in a countercultural industry where the traditional solutions don't always work for us because of the late nights and the flip situation. And so I just want to go back to Chantrice's idea, which is, okay, this problem has been solved, and maybe it hasn't been solved well, but it's been solved over and over and over. And so what are the blueprints that you've seen? I mean, clearly we've talked about the, the counting, the the olives. And I do believe that that is one of the solutions. And we'll get to, you know, the CAMI, like the bigger picture, the farther out solution, which is a government funded one. But maybe we'll start with Katina. What, and just in the realm of HR, are the rights of, should be the rights of mothers in terms of childcare expectation? Does that even fall into HR?
You know, it's interesting. Now we're going into a bit of legal.
Yeah,
I don't want to give any legal advice. So obviously, you know, having the privilege of working in New York City, being New York City based, you know, there's so many rights that, you know, that mothers, you know, are that have, right, to bestow upon them. But I always think about doing the right thing when it's not mandated. Right? I think that's how you set your company culture. It's about, what am I doing for my employees that's not really required of me, but is the right thing to do to ensure that, you know, we're providing a safe and inclusive workplace, you know, for everyone. So when we think about mothers, you know, I always go back to, you know, how flexible, you know, we use that word a lot. I hear, you know, companies talk about flex work schedules, but, you know, there's then the parameters. Flex work schedules means these are the hours that you can work, right? And that necessarily isn't conducive to, you know, providing a workplace, you know, that is equitable and fair for mothers. You know, I truly believe in creating and harnessing a culture in which that you are having conversations with individuals, right? We all have very unique circumstances. We have unique backgrounds. Our support mechanisms are, you know, they are varying across the board. So, you know, when I think about rights, I think more so about, you know, am I having a conversation, right, with those individuals that this is going to impact, and understanding what's the best approach for you, right? So what is going to work for you that's still fair and equitable across the board for everyone. But, you know, how do we make this work for you? Because that's how you show value to an employee. That's how you show value as a company. And that's how you attract people, you know, when they see those things, like, wow, you know, you have different types of people working for you, and you're able to make what I consider, you know, reasonable accommodation. Right. I think that's one thing that we can all think about is, you know, how are we making reasonable accommodation for this, you know, workforce that's critical to the success of our business, and how do we tie this in so that, you know, they feel wanted and they are able to be productive and, you know, have a meaningful livelihood, right? Let's not make this a situation where, you know, they feel like they don't have an option, don't have a choice, they're a corner, you know, and they're cutting all kinds of corners, right? When you're talking to your employees, sometimes you know, it's heartbreaking to see all the corners that they're cutting in their lives just to make work, right? So how do we make it to where, you know, work is something they look forward to, something that's desirable because we are working with them and we are partnering with them.
Thank you. Other blueprints that people have seen that, you know, are a way to look at childcare differently?
So I'll jump in if it's all right. Sorry. Yeah, so for us, one thing we do at Black Market is the first month that you're working there, we cover childcare and transportation. And not everyone can do that. We're a pretty small business. We only have 5 people. All of them have children. And we understand that that's going to be anyone in our target population because we only hire folks from very low income neighborhoods. So what we did was partner with a childcare institution that was able to provide that. So they give us a bulk discount as a company. So then we're able to afford that for a whole month. And, you know, if funding goes well, if, you know, COVID clears up and we're able to open more fully, we can cover it beyond a month. But those are the sorts of things when I was working as a mother that I wish my company, we're not perfect by any means, but I think listening to the people that are most impacted. So if you want to help folks who have children, listen to the people who have children, even if they're your friends who are in the food industry, who are working and struggling to get childcare. Like, what are their main complaints? What are the barriers? And how can we take those away? And we do only provide childcare for the hours that they're working. But it's, you know, it's something. And I'm hoping that this becomes a catalyst for change in the industry overall, so that, you know, childcare is not an afterthought for employers. That's one thing I've been very proud to partner with local organizations to make happen. And that's something I got from my mother, who used to babysit for everyone else. They would pick shifts based on when they could babysit. So it was a co-op. So everyone on my block who had kids would take turns and say, oh, I'm working the, first shift at Kroger. I'm going to work the second shift at Aldi's. So that there was always someone in the building who could take care of everyone else's children. They knew the allergies, they knew what they liked and didn't like, the managing the bedtime. So I would love to see more of that sort of co-op model with childcare with different companies.
And are there other people who've seen stipend programs work? It's something that came up as solutions in the notes, where companies pay a childcare stipend.
So I've seen it in a couple settings. I think one of the challenges though is that if it's not I'm a non-practicing attorney, so that part of my brain starts to fire. It's challenging from a compliance and a liability standpoint, because if your employer is paying for a babysitter, for example, which I know a lot of companies do, you could potentially be liable as the employer if something goes wrong because that person, lovely human but random babysitter doesn't have any form of insurance, any form of certification. Childcare is very, very high compliance. Obviously, they're children. It is not. It's not so simple. So I have seen companies do that, but I'm not a lawyer in that. I'm not a lawyer for this group, and I'm not here to give legal advice. But it does come with it a tremendous amount of liability risk that, for me personally, I was not willing to take. It has to really go through a proper childcare program, a company that is set up for that has insurance, that has training, that has protections, and is doing it, to the highest extent possible. Otherwise, you're really putting your company at grave risk, in my opinion, for something that's way outside of your company's competence, right? We run restaurants, we don't run daycare facilities. So I've seen it. I know it's very common. It's very common across New York. A lot of big companies that we all know do it. I think it carries a lot of risk that is not worth it. And I also don't think that that's a sustainable answer either.
I wanted to share, with my first son, day one, he's had it the hardest because I was moving up still as a chef de cuisine. I did Top Chef while I had him, as, a 17-month-old kid. And then, and opening and being my own entrepreneur, we figured out we made enough to qualify for Medicare. And up until that point, I had my child in 9 to 5, even though it didn't really work with my hours. I used to work from 11 to 11 every day as a chef de cuisine at Aria. But, he needed some form of socialization as well as some kind of relief for us as parents to work. But when I was on Medicare, we qualified as a family, opened my eyes that there's actually, many night care through the Medicare system, and they have to be approved by the state and they have to be certified, but their home daycares are a little bit different. So it was a counterculture experience for me, but I kind of felt some comfort because all the kids in day one's night care, and I was always the last person picking them at 10 o'clock at night. But they were mostly immigrants, mostly working in the restaurant business. And I wouldn't have had opened Parachute without having had qualified that for the first 6 months of us opening, because we weren't making any money. And it was like $20 a day because it was subsidized. Once we kind of got out of that income bracket, they did offer us to still stay in the program, but we would have to pay out of pocket, and it was still cheaper. It was still cheaper than most daycares. Now I'm thinking that model could really be helpful to a lot, because if we had more like certified night cares in that like preschool age, it's really, for me, it was fine. He had a college schedule. I mean, he went to bed at like midnight, but he was only 3, and so he slept until 11, and then, the hardest part for me was that I spent so little time with him opening my restaurant. And so he would stay up late with me because he missed me all day long. But at least it was an opportunity for me to continue something that I had being in the service industry. And I think that maybe that kind of model might work. I mean, it's there. It's obviously there. And most of the people, and I think that like working with your community, because most women need their childcare to either be next to their house, near their home, or near their work. Anywhere out of the way would just be so inconvenient. It just adds more transportation to the mix. And when I had day one, I also didn't have a car. I walked a mile to get to work and a mile back to get to work. And so these are the issues that like when I had my first child, my goal was to eventually be in charge of my schedule. And I have that privilege now, but women who don't have that privilege, we need to have these resources, especially because these like childbearing years and things like that are also the same time we're trying to move up the ladder and get that like general manager role, or get that, you know, assistant manager role, or assistant head chef role. And usually you're the one closing the restaurant, or at least watching, you know, overseeing the majority of service, which, you know, is very difficult to find support.
So
but it's out there.
Let's talk about you were talking about, you know, this is a time when people are often, they want to be moving up. And then Katina, you were also talking about, you know, being able to ask for what you need. And I think like making note that what you need is not always tangible. Sometimes it's intangible is like a really fascinating and very important point. But one of the things that struck me, you know, from all of the comments is it's really difficult to advocate for yourself, either to have the confidence to advocate for yourself, or to feel like you're not going to be shut down, or, you know, like sort of seeing to the end and being like, you know what, it's not like, I don't know how. And so I'm not really going to advocate. And this is a group of women who are amazing advocates for others, but also I imagine for yourselves. And I would just love, you know, for people who are listening, who really want to know, like, I want to know, how do I advocate to get flexible hours? How do I articulate all along the continuum of what I need as a mother, but also as, you know, an employee, also as someone who wants to grow in my career. All of these things require advocacy, and they're interrelated with motherhood, but it's not that exclusively. So who'd like to just talk about, you know, how to be your best own advocate?
I think one of the things that it's important to be aware is that in general, when you present a problem to another human being, the gut instinct is to want to be able to help. And they can only help if they know what the problem is. So if you go to your people, whether it's your employers, your manager, your superiors, whoever, and say, listen, this is my situation. I want to be successful in this situation, and here's what I need for it to be successful. Otherwise, I'm going to be spread thin. I'm going to do a bad job, and ultimately you're going to fire me because I'm not doing a good job, or I'm going to quit because I can't sustain this. So knowing that and believing truly in your heart of heart that people want to help, and taking a problem to them is like the first step. Also, I think it's really important to explain the entire picture, not just take a portion of the problem, and help people understand that, okay, this is affecting this, that affects that, that ultimately circles back to my job and my work and my life and my kids, and help them see the entire picture, because they might not be able to help you with this one problem, but knowing the entire picture, they can be creative and come up with something else. So opening yourself up, being vulnerable, being able to share, having the commitment to say that I want to come up with a solution with you, become part of my solution together. That's one piece. The other piece is knowing when to stop. And we want to succeed. We want to be successful. We want to make it work. And sometimes it's just not possible. So how do you cultivate your life, and how do you navigate your life and make the decisions to make it successful for what you want it to look like? So that's important too. And saying, okay, this avenue is never going to work for me, no matter how much I want for it to. It just might not. So having these awarenesses to advocate for yourself has been really important for me. I also know that not one time have I gone to my employer and asked for something with a solution that it has been turned down. They've always said, oh, okay, this is what you need. I can't do that, but I can do this. Does this work? Let's start with that. And it helps them help you.
I was going to say,
Go ahead,
just
Sarah.
to that point, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Just to that point, I was going to say that right now, I don't know about nationwide, but definitely in Chicago, there is a major crisis about how to get employees. That even during COVID, you know, if you post right now for a server or a cook, the resumes just are not coming in. So you're in a position that is relatively new and unique to this industry, that now using your voice to come to the table, communicate, say what you need. It's a time where restaurants need to change. And we all know that. We all know that this model that's been set up for us, that we've inherited, is almost unlivable. The amount of hours that we're asked to put in, the cost of food, all across the board, what people pay, all of it is just hanging in the balance of a very tentative light at the end of the tunnel. Is this sustainable? And to have people come now to their employers and say, how can I work this out? I love what I do here. I love working in this space. How do I make this so it's good for both of us? Having that voice, and if you see, as a chef, if you see people that are struggling, make yourself available to them to be the one to coach them through this. You know, one of the things about abundant setting that I find that resonates is it takes care of the whole package. It's about the farmers, where the money is going, primarily female farmers. That's something that all of us are aware of, to protect our food sources, especially people that have children. Think about those future generations, that they will have access, and making that happen. And this is the time when the industry can make an impact and make a difference, because it's in a very precarious place of existence. And if we don't make it better, you know, we're not all going to be here.
Katie, I think you had a thought to add.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Sort of to Farah's point, I think, and it kind of struck me what you just said, Sarah, because I think that we have maybe a different, or I personally have a different perspective. I worked in Chicago and San Francisco, so I'm fully aware of the crises in like major cities, particularly ones as expensive as Chicago and San Francisco. When I was working at Quince in San Francisco, I was the assistant general manager, and I remember we barely, like all of our furniture we bought at, you know, thrift store, and, you know, we were barely scraping by, and that was in 2008. So, you know, it's like completely out insane now. But I would just say, from my perspective here in North Carolina, we do have a little bit of a different sort of economic climate in terms of what you can and cannot do to set yourself up. And what I wanted to remark off of Farah's point is that one way that we found sort of more power in our own, to be our own best advocate, was we had the ability to live well below our means, with the idea, knowing that like, this is our dream, this is what we want to do, and we set that far goal, knowing that like, okay, what we need to do to kind of establish ourselves in this new community, because we had just moved from San Francisco, is like, if we want to open a restaurant, we need to work in certain particular areas in the, you know, in this market, get to know the area, whatever. And so we bought like an incredibly inexpensive little kind of shack house, and lived well below our means in order to have that flexibility to be able to pivot and move around in the way that would work for our family, and to be able to say no, to be able to advocate for ourselves. So because I can recall when I was working as a general manager in Charlotte for a restaurateur, one of the more prolific restaurateurs in the Charlotte area. And when I got pregnant with my daughter, I worked all the way up until 6 days overdue, you know, like bussing tables, you know, like the whole thing, super pregnant. And which scared some of our customers for sure. They're like, when do you do? I'm like, oh, 4 days ago. So yeah, it was definitely, but that's what we had to do. But when it came time to ask for maternity leave and he said, I really can't do that. It gave me the ability to say, you know what, like I have the control to do what I need to do to work best for my family right now. And so it was kind of one of those things where, you know, we knew, to your childcare point, we simply can't, there are no good childcare options in my community at night. And so one of the benefits, I suppose, you would say in a New York City or in a San Francisco, is that there is better childcare for evenings, like you were saying, Beverly. Like there is like a good option for that. There really isn't in my community. But by sort of structuring things to live so far below our means, we were able to hire a nanny. And then I was like, listen, if I have to pay her what I make, but that helps me kind of climb the ladder and get to where I need to get, then I break even, that's fine. We'll live off of what my husband is. So we always kind of structured, it's like, we need to be able to live off one person's salary for as long as we need to, until we feel like we're ready to take this leap and do things our own way. So I guess that's a bit of a luxury, because not every community you can have the choice to live below your means, because I mean, if it's the price of rent is outrageous, like you're kind of stuck with what you're stuck with. So, I mean, yeah, it's a broken system. It shouldn't have to be that way. You shouldn't have to make those kind of choices, but it kind of is what it is. But it did work for us to like, okay, we're going to budget off one person, knowing that my entire salary is going to have to go to childcare. Which it did for many, many years.
This brings up one of the questions that comes up so often for working mothers in any industry, but particularly in the hospitality industry, which is work-life balance, right? Like you can make choices, and you can also feel just like there's no choice to make. Like, how do I win here? And since you all have almost all have had this balancing act to play, I just wonder what you've learned. Like I have two kids, and when I was working full time, I had 2 kids, so I was trying to balance, and I'm like, the notion of balance is actually completely false. Like I had no balance. I had like 100% commitment to work and 100% commitment to my kids, and how that turned out in time, like I can't. There's a lot of trade-offs there, but I'm curious what, either in terms of schedule, in terms of emotional math. I mean, Gail, you were talking earlier about the mental load, and I think the mental load really comes into play here, because that's a lot of the guilt in trying to figure out, like, work-life balance is a mental game as well as an actual physical game. So I would wonder if it's not a game, but it's a challenge. What would you all say to that, to help those who are really struggling? And like, that's the goal, right? Like we all want to live a full life, and we want to have working and being happy at work and happy with our kids as part of that.
I think one of the things for me, when I got my boys, when I got my kids, was understanding that I'm not going to win it all. And there have to be certain pieces of that life that I'm just going to have to let go. So, small example, I knew that I was not interested in driving my children from school to activity to sports, to that schlepping was just not something that was exciting to me. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to wait in parking lots. So I strategically decided to live in the center of my town that was walkable and bikeable to all these activities. And so I didn't have to depend on carpools or Ubers or other people. My child is able to walk or ride their bike to their stuff. So I just took that out of the equation, because that's not something that I wanted to do. Eating with my family every night is not possible. I don't eat with the same friend every night. I eat with different people. And so eating with my family every single night is not something that I wanted to do, and nor did my work allow it. So you pick and choose. I'm going to have 3 meals with my family, not all my meals. Or I'm going to do these things with my family. And guess what? A work trip becomes a family vacation. And so identifying what is winnable, what is doable, and what is not to create that integration of my work and life and kids was super important for me to be successful.
I would agree with you, Farah, in a lot of ways. I think first, understanding that what it is going to look like in actuality is not necessarily what I thought it was going to look like, and certainly not what other people's lives look like. You know, I grew up like, and I promise I won't dwell on this fact, but I do come back to it in my own life a lot, that I grew up in Canada. And Canada has very, very different parental leave and care policies and universal health care. And that is a whole other panel. However, I used to, opine for that, of course, because all of my, girlfriends that I grew up with who were still in Canada all got 365 days off for every child that they chose to have. And their job was always held for them. And I used to think, well, if I lived in Canada, I could have all of that and wouldn't, at least for that first year of life, that give me so much security. And certainly it does. But I also realized very quickly that regardless of that as a social safety net in Canada, my personal life would never be that way anyway, because what I chose to do, self-employed, was making choices to give myself a lot of other opportunities, but would have never allowed me to take advantage of a very traditional employer who would hold my job for me for a year, because holding my job when you work for yourself doesn't happen. So kind of looking at, what has been really helpful for me, and this is very much going to what Katie and Camilla said, was really about creating a system within my family that is really unique, and looking to examples of it that aren't necessarily just in this industry, but that are the outliers in other industries, and looking to other families and other industries that possibly, I can take from, presenting solutions, whether it was to my work, or to, the things I needed for my family that didn't necessarily, were never going to be exactly traditional in that 9 to 5, when these days 9 to 5 doesn't even exist. I mean, certainly maybe it existed for my parents, but I don't even think there's any industry anymore, and certainly not in this year, where there is a perfect balance. And I think taking that pressure off and creating opportunities where I could alternate. It's never going to be a scale. It's going to be much more of a seesaw, and knowing that I'm going to be able to give to my work in certain ways at times, and then to my family. Like, breakfast has always been big. As a small example in my family, having breakfast together at the start of the day was our time. And that was something that I always knew that I could carve out in my schedule, because I knew I wouldn't be with my children necessarily for lunch or dinner. And then knowing that I could always designate whether it was Sunday or Monday or mornings, because I knew I'd be working evenings, or when I traveled, I would try and carve out a day on either side. And if I could take my children with me, great, establishing those boundaries that work for my schedule. But it was never going to look the way that I envisioned it, and letting go of that has helped me a lot.
I'd love to jump in and dovetail on that. I could not agree more, but it's interesting. Something that I keep hearing as a theme is, one is whether it's a partner or a community or a neighborhood or a family member or a friend, whoever it is, it takes a village. And you also have to very quickly, I think, accept that not everything has to fall on you as a mom. And I think I think there's a natural inclination to be the martyr. Oh, it's all mine. I have to do everything. That's going to be impossible, I think, especially in this industry. So I think get a village, be the first person to say, I'm not doing it on my own and I need X amount of help or support or whatever. And that way it's not on you, because if it really is solely on you, which I don't personally think is necessary, no matter what your situation, you're setting yourself up for failure, because sort of to Gail's point, there is no 9 to 5 and it's going to be impossible to do it. And I think second, if you look, I think being a mom is a lot easier when you work for yourself. And if you're in charge or if you're in a management position, there just is more confidence and control. But I think even if you're not, the biggest thing that I've always found is, and I think Dana alluded to it, is the confidence to be honest with yourself, to be honest with your employer. And then I love what Gail said about being then also creative. Like, it's not for your employer to create the avenues for you. They're doing the best they can amongst a lot of employees, right? Like, you're not the only one. It is a business. They have a lot of other things to do. Don't put them in a position of having to read your mind or provide things for you. I think you have to be able to come with a menu and say, hey, these are my hard limits. And also your limits have to be reasonable, right? Like Gail said, you can't say, I want to be off Friday through Sunday and I want to take, you also have to be reasonable about what the job requirements are and what other people in the organization are being asked to do. But there is a middle ground. I think if you provide the menu of, hey, these are 10 different ways that I could function in this differently, maybe than most people, but I'll keep the same hours, I'll do these shifts instead, and really make it more of a coming to someone with a menu of solutions, I think ends up being better, especially if you're honest with yourself about what you want and put your head in your employer's, standpoint and say, okay, what are they trying to get? What am I trying to get? And how are some different ways that we can do it? I think you have a lot more possibilities when you're creative in that way. And I also think third is blending. I mean, I'm in Gail's camp. My son as an infant was running around the restaurant, being held by everyone. I would bring him on a pack to meetings, and there's no such thing to me as sort of the boundaries. And I think me and my partner, my husband, early on sort of said, we got to be much more 50-50 in sharing, and we're going to have to blend things. If I have work somewhere, that's going to be our vacation. How do we figure out what meetings Gray can come to and what he can't, but setting too firm of those boundaries, I also think is just going to be, I personally feel like it's a losing battle. And I think all of those ways are ways to get the guilt away, because you're not setting up expectations that are actually going to be impossible to fulfill.
I think that's all so great. And I agree with Gail and Camilla in the sense that it's sort of going back to my initial point of like just sort of letting go of expectations and letting go of what seems like what you're supposed to do. Like, for example, we chose to homeschool. Well, we don't have a choice right now. We're homeschooling because of COVID. But prior to that, when we were just opening Kindred, we chose to homeschool our daughter and our son for the kindergarten years, just because we didn't know when else we would see them. We're like, if we have to take this sort of, to use my phrase from earlier, the countercultural approach to parenting for these first couple of years, like that's what we're going to do. And so, but it worked out quite well because we knew we didn't have to be at work until 2 at the latest, and we could divide and conquer those sort of morning hours. And it gave us that time with our kids when we were trying to grow our business. And then, obviously down the road, it got easier. We had more employees. We were finally making a profit. We could be like, okay, now we can kind of restructure our day and start rethinking how we do things. And then next year, all 3 of my kids will be in school. So then it's like a whole nother sort of like restructuring. But sometimes you just have to make those different sort of pivots and decisions for what works for your family. And I'll be honest with you, one of my mentors, who was a steward at a restaurant I used to work at, she worked 3 jobs and was the most incredible mom and was one of the better parents I've ever encountered, and was just the most thoughtful and incredible woman, very wise. And she had very little time with her kids, but it was quantity and quality. You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to choose? Like, it's not necessarily the quantity of time, but it's the quality. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's really true. Like, she made the most of her time, and her kids were so well adjusted and so, great and so mature and spoke well of adults. And when they came in, it was just so impressive. And she had crazy work schedule. So I think sometimes we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace and just understand that, sometimes it's great for your kids to see you working so hard. Like, maybe that's a gift to them, and if we can balance that time, like Gail, to your point, Gail, like we do the same thing. At the very early stages of motherhood and fatherhood for that matter, we made breakfast the most important meal of the day because we knew dinner couldn't be. And so it was just like, okay, this is just what we're going to do. And having that little ounce of grace for all the decisions you have to make, and just knowing that sometimes you're just doing your best, and your kids notice that, and it's okay. Like, it's going to be okay.
I mean, I think that notion of grace is not just, it's for you yourself to like be in the world in a way that is like you're at peace with yourself, right? If you're constantly judging yourself and you're worried that your kids are judging you, and I mean, we all do like as best as we can with the best intentions, and so I mean that is kind of all that you can do, and removing the judgment from yourself is so important. It frees you up to have that brain space spent on like what the fun activity is going to be, or which eggs we're going to make for breakfast if we're Gail Simmons. But so a lot of this is taking on responsibility, like as an individual and as an employer, to advocate for yourself, and to what we've been talking about is like thinking and acting. And I want to move the conversation briefly to the notion of researching. What is it that you can find that will help you, that's a resource that exists in the universe? Like, for example, being more financially educated, so that, we're talking about balancing budgets, we're talking about, finance is very important, or, how finding educational programs for your kids, or are there resources that you've found that have improved your ability as either a business owner, a worker, or as a mom that you think are important to share in this forum?
Yeah, I'll say that our local Black Lives Matter Louisville has sort of a resource handbook for working moms. Some of it includes like local childcare that's really good, or a food team. There are housing programs. We have a lot of folks who are working in the food industry here who are facing eviction. I mean, with COVID, eviction numbers are just wild across the country, but we were already in an eviction crisis beforehand. And so we've looked to folks who work outside of the food industry to sort of bring those cooperative models into our industry, especially with those who are working at the grocery store, because they have historically not had those sorts of things in these communities. These are places where there's already no grocery store. You have more liquor stores than you have childcare facilities. And so it's been really good to have those sorts of resource books, so I don't have to make it up from scratch. And it's beneficial because then we're adding to that resource book or that directory, or we can even, it's not quite as sophisticated as Yelp, but we can say, this place is really great for families with 5 or more children. This place is really great for folks who have students who speak English as a second language. And so that's sort of a community building thing that has been an asset for us. And I'd love to see more of that. And someone mentioned earlier, we're coming up with these solutions that we want our government to actually come up with and fund. So much like the free breakfast program that the Black Panthers made, now there's free breakfast and reduced lunch across the country. So I'm hoping that these sorts of things expand beyond just Louisville, but they can be models for other people. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because without that sort of resource, it really would just be me coming up with things. And I would just come up with things that work for my family. As a one-child household, it's like when I first started buying for the grocery store and I was buying seaweed and sparkling water, and not everybody is into that, it turns out. So I had to buy some things that I don't necessarily eat. But that's been a really good collaborative effort. And I know at Lee Initiative, some of the same things happen. We see what other folks are doing and how they're solving problems, and then sort of incorporating those things and tailoring it to our community.
Right. One thing I wanted to add to as well, when we think about research, and I speak from the HR employer side, it can be intimidating, right? When you have to represent not just the company, but also being advocates for your employees too as well. Just a bit of advice for employers, especially if you have a large employee population. Again, I always, I put the onus on us, right? So as much as we tell, as I said earlier, for working mothers, you have to advocate for yourself. It's us. We have to start that dialogue and start that conversation. We have to engage our employees. So research, again, can be intimidating. However, once you engage your employees, make them part of the solution process, right? And ask them, what, we're seeing a common thread. We're seeing a common theme here in terms of, here are some of the issues, that are, some of our workforce are challenged with, they're faced with, what have you seen? What did your other employer do? Why did you like working there? What do you see? And not even from a restaurant industry standpoint, just from a professional standpoint, in terms of, there are other industries that have models, which are admirable, which we can scale down or scale up, to fit, our industry too as well. So being able to, include your employee population in that research, as well as that solution process, goes a long way, because they're also adding value in terms of moving that needle and pushing the conversation forward. That they're saying, hey, what, we identified an issue, and here are the 5 solutions we came up with, and maybe here's the one that works for our company.
I would also add to that, talk, and ask. I mean, I think, you asked about a financial resource. Honestly, if any employee of mine said, look, I'm trying to figure out my own personal budgeting, I would be happy to have our accountant spend time with them and help them work something out. Like our head of HR would spend time with them and help them work something out. I mean, I do think, yes, our organizations can get better, but it's also sometimes hard with time and budget, et cetera. And you don't really know what each person's position is. I mean, we've offered programs that a lot of people haven't taken advantage of, which may have just been better for one person, who is trying to figure out how to make it work for themselves. So, and I think amongst women, we have to be unafraid to sort of say, look, I'm in the shits and this isn't working. Or, like when I was going on maternity leave and I knew I was pregnant, I started talking to every person I knew who had a young child that year and just saying, look, I'm a boat without a paddle. I have no clue. I have no family in New York. Dana, I ask a lot of silly questions, Gail, too. Like, what do you do? And I think crowdsourcing from a lot of different ages, situations, people who have their own setups, then you can have at least a menu of options. But you have to be unafraid to sort of take the mask off and say, look, the boat isn't perfect. It's not great. I have no clue what I'm doing, or I have this kind of a problem. Like, raise the flag. I actually think that women are much more communal and much more helpful with each other. But again, we're all sort of 6 feet under with our own stuff. And it's hard to be proactive to say, what do you need? Again, I think I think there's a lot more resources if you're willing to sort of approach someone. I mean, I've contacted female chefs who have kids who, like, I don't even really know, and just said, hey, I'm expecting, I need help. I have no clue what to do. What do you suggest? And again, talking to your employer too, like, hey, I need this thing. I don't know where to get it. They might not know, but they'll certainly try and find it for you. I do actually believe that a lot of employers want to help. It's just hard to know how to satisfy every single person's individual circumstances.
I think to Camilla's point, I think the pandemic has really helped all of us in the restaurant industry be more vulnerable, or be willing to be vulnerable and say, I need help. I'm not doing great. What can you help me with? And, even when I was 16, I reached out to Chef Sarah. I was like, there's no way she's going to, care about me or get back to me. I mean, she's already a busy James Beard Award winning chef. I did have to reapproach her 5 times to get into Ritz-Carlton, but persistence and being annoying sort of combined together helped me get my first job. And I think the Lee Initiative is a great one that has a lot of solutions. I've come to them and asked them, how do you do this? How are you doing this? All of these women in on this panel, so successful, so willing and generous to give your time and your resources. I feel like we're all very similar in that we don't want to waste our opportunities. We want to share as much as we can. And if one of us doesn't get back to you, it's because we truly are busy. It's not that we don't want to get back to. And that's what I've realized, is that you just have to keep being persistent to find your network and resources and mentors, and it pays off for sure. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, one thing I totally agree with Beverly, that during COVID, this whole experience of reaching out to people and asking what they think and their advice has really brought the restaurant community together. And we are working together to find solutions to some of the more challenging questions that have kind of haunted the industry for years. And Beverly set up a Zoom call with the women that are the recipients of Abundant Setting. And then myself, Debbie Gold, and Beverly Kim who are cooking for these women weekly and sending meals to their families to help them. And that moment where the 6 of us were sharing stories, it wasn't chef and cook, it was women together trying to find solutions to all of our issues and having conversations that were relevant to my place in life, as well as the women that are coming up through the ranks. What are they facing? Many of us are in similar situations that even now I struggle with the fact that my daughter is home and I'm working so many hours. And that whole connectivity of having those times and connections, it's huge to moving the industry forward, which needs to happen.
So I'm gonna take the last 10 minutes to ask the questions from the Q&A here. And so let's see. I'm gonna go to, Sakurayagi. As panelists have said, guilt is a huge problem. I constantly feel guilty because I don't get to spend time with my 2-year-old because of my crazy hours. I'm on the phone replying to emails even at home. And as Beverly said, my kid also stays up late because that's the only time she sees me. Don't feel guilty isn't helpful because motherhood is dripping with guilt, and to eliminate it completely is impossible. So how do the panelists cope with guilt or assuage it? Do the panelists feel like they're making the wrong decision by spending so little time with their kids? My kid is still 2 years old, but I'm curious how panelists with older children feel about them working so much. Let's just.
So we have a guilt club almost. It's a bunch of us who kind of work in food justice in Louisville. And so it's all of us together drinking wine, all the kids playing together. It doesn't happen every single month, but we kind of like lean into the guilt. Because again, it's not something, if you're working, stay at home mom, whatever type of parent you are, you're going to feel that guilt. And so it's sort of a reassurance sort of group to say, hey, how did you mess up this week? And like seeing who can have the best story on how they like were not a perfect mom this week, or were not a stand-up dad, or, you let them eat pizza too many times in the month. So we kind of lean into that. And like, we all reassure each other that the kids, when we see them playing together, they're hitting milestones, they're happy, they're fed, they're clean mostly. So for us, that's how we've been coping with it, especially with COVID. A few of us have a backyard that's big enough where all the kids can at least see each other, even if they're not like hands-on playing together. So that for us, just leaning into that guilt and saying, yes, we are all imperfect, it turns out, and here are some ways we messed up. And whoever has messed up the most since the last time we saw each other, they have to buy drinks for everybody the next time. So that's what we do. Maybe good, maybe not good, but that's how we handle it.
I want to join your club. I'm moving.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So in.
I think it's a lot about, I understand like don't be guilty isn't helpful. I actually think it's about a perspective shift. Similarly, instead of judging yourself by what you should do, what the rules say, what other mothers do, what we're told by our parents, culture, whatever, really all that matters is that you have a child that has a good heart, and think about their character and ask yourself, is my kid happy? Are they a good person? Are they curious about the world? I think really looking at more like the proof in the pudding rather than normally I'm a process over results person, but with kids, I actually feel like it's more about the results than the process. Like, if you have first of all, I think food children tend to be the loveliest, the most fun, the most open-minded, the most flexible and resilient because of the lack of sort of systemized structure. I sort of look at it that way. Like, look at the proof in the pudding and don't judge your recipe so harshly. Like, we all know a lot of times you're way off recipe and the cake is a lot better. So like, maybe just enjoy that the cake is really good and not be so hard on yourself that like you got the measurement wrong. So it's like the one area in my life that I actually focus on the ends, not the means, because I have a lot less control over the means, and you can kind of calibrate from there. But I'm definitely joining that club.
So for me,
the guilt, I take it, I embrace it, and I talk to my kids about it. I tell them that there's so many hours in this day and there's so many things that need to happen. and I'm guilty. I feel guilty that it's not doable. I can't manage. What is important for you, for me to achieve for you? And have them pick and say, okay, you know what, this activity, this event, this thing, I really don't care about it. So you don't have to be part of it. And we just eliminate, but we make them part of that conversation to help me decide what's important for us.
Yeah, I was going to say communicating with my daughter. She's now 16, along the way, and really unintentionally educating her about every aspect of the restaurant industry and my passion for food and nutrition and the farmers. Just in any way that I could incorporate her into that made sense for her, what was the foundation of our relationship. And the time I spend with her was always quality time, as much as possible, because she's my priority, so that giving her that quality time and not really worrying about the other parts, because I knew she was in a good place with people that care about her, and she was having different experiences than what I could offer her. And luckily that I felt very blessed to have people that were able to take care of her and still do, and still are involved in her life. But really sharing who you are with your children and involving them in as many decisions as you can laid the groundwork. And my daughter, I'm very proud of what she's done and what she's accomplished. So I think I made some of the right choices there.
And there's another question, which is the panel's about motherhood, but what about the partners and what about the men? And I think we're gonna, weirdly enough, end on the men, because we've focused on ourselves and the ways that, we can advocate for ourselves, but we are not, as so many of you have said, we're not in this alone. And men play roles in all kinds of ways. So what about those guys?
I always say they need to be advocates, right? Because it's no secret that they benefit from the labor of women, right? And especially in the workforce. So advocacy is important. I think it's one thing for the women, the mothers, the employees to be advocating for themselves, but I think it's incredibly powerful when the men who hold the majority of leadership positions and decision-making positions, unless you are a business owner, unless you own your own company, right? Unfortunately, you are working, in an organization where for the most part, that's being run by men. And so those are the ones that they have to be the advocates. And I think it takes leaders like us on this panel to hold them accountable, right? I think it's hard to ask their employees to hold them accountable. Some can, but it takes us to continue having this dialogue and to hold them accountable and teaching them, for those that aren't aware, the importance of this, right? It's important to make sure that their workforce is equitable.
There must be more to say about men. Just
yeah.
Don't let
once in a while. But I was going to say too that it took a while for me as a new mother to realize, to my own benefit, that I am not the only one who can care for my child, and I'm not the only one who can do it well. And that goes for my spouse, but also the so many people around me. I don't live in the same country as my family, my extended family. So it was really just my husband and I figuring it out. And that did mean entrusting our children to people who aren't family. And you realize that how that village, how important that village is, and finding that village, but then also letting go of the fact that, like, I realize now my daughter is better off in so many ways because being cared for by other people that aren't just me and aren't just my husband at times has given her such a broader perspective of the world. Just this fall, I was in a situation where for the first time in my life, not only was I not going to see my daughter because I was working hours, but still coming home at night, I actually was apart from her for almost 5 weeks. We were on other sides of the country from each other. And that went against all of the rules that I had set for myself as a mother. And she was going to be with my husband and my son was going to be with me, and we were going to be separated for the first time, for a really extended period, because COVID did not allow us to, do what we would otherwise do in that situation, let's see, and see each other more. And I realized, one, that yes, it was hard. Yes, it was challenging. And it was not what I wanted, but it passed, and my daughter understood it, learned from it. We communicated about it. And in hindsight, now that we overcame that moment, she can talk about it with confidence and kind of understanding of it. And there was so much that she learned apart from me that I think was so healthy to her. To come to me and tell me all of those stories, and to teach me about what happened in that time. And so I do think that letting go of and giving that responsibility, allowing my husband that responsibility too, and trying to not micromanage that moment. He would joke with me, but it's true. And this, I don't mean to diminish it, but he'll be like, sometimes, I might not, all the buttons might not be done up in the right order on her shirt, but she will be fed and she will be loved. And that is like so much better than the stress and the anguish of trying to do it all and not allowing myself to do what I needed to do in that moment too.
I'd second that and say, and again, probably unpopular and un-PC to say, but I've always approached parenthood as a business. And I started even before my son was born. And I said, look, we're all a team. This is our business, this is our family. You are a horrible business owner if you're trying to do everything yourself. Like, you have to look in the mirror and know if you're micromanaging, if you're trying to do everything, you're going to fail and you're going to suck at it. So we started off from the beginning setting out. I was like, and I always say too to my team, play to your strengths. And I think even as a manager and as a business owner, you want to play to everyone's strengths. Everyone's 80% of what they're good at should be the majority of what they do in their job, or again, they're going to be set up for failure. So my husband and I even wrote lists of like what we want to do, what we enjoy as a parent, and really divided and conquered in a pretty it sounds really lame, but like almost contractual way. We literally made a list and I said, I have no interest in changing diapers. That's on you. I feed, I grew and feed the baby. Your job is to change every diaper. And, he wanted bath time and I wanted this other time. And we decided he's a morning person, so that works for him for work. I'm a night owl. I want to work at night. So I think, again, it's about, I look at it as a business, and to what Gail said, I think it's about having a full team. It's not just you as the parent, one parent, and whether you have a partner or you're near your family or not, you got to put together a squad, because it's not going to be able to be possible run by one person.
And I think that actually is the lesson of all of it, right? I mean, we keep coming back to it's community. There's men in the community. There's women. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at how working closely with others can improve this one thing we're talking about, which is like having kids and having a life and having work that we love. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us. It's enlightening, encouraging, inspiring, and Beverly and Randy, so fantastic that you pulled all of this together, and Sarah for being part of the abundance table overall. And each of you, with your own story, showing how you can be creative and how you can take a unique and individual approach. And there isn't any, anyone who's worried that they're not doing it right. Like, well, if you're doing it the way you can do it, you're doing it right. And if you're suffering, there's someone who can help you make it better for you the way you're going to do it, not to make it like them or the way they do it. So have a really great, what day is today? Have a great week. And thank you, all of you who are listening, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Also, thank you for your survey feedback. We're going to work on it and return that information back to you. And for those of you who said, yes, I want a mentor, we will work on getting back to you to find mentors for you. Thank you so much.